It was a very difficult decision in many ways, not to go to Brussels, because I wanted very much to go there and to avenge for my father, for the injustices that were done to him. And Brussels was one big injustice. I'm sure all of that and many other things contributed to him contracting cancer. So I had a real vengeance to perform for my father. But then I would have killed my mom, because if I did go, I would have defected. So between my father and my mother, I chose my mother. I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky, violinist and conductor. You're listening to Keeping the Flame, a series about how a life is shaped by family, by political system, and by great art, yet not defined by any of them. And this is how I escaped the Soviet Union. There were two possibilities for me to leave. One was the way the so-called defectors. They went on tour, in my case it could have been a competition, and did not come back and ask for political asylum, which would have been great for the career, for the name recognition in the West. But for your family, it was very bad, because you went there on the money of the government. You were government's property, and all of a sudden, boom, you defect. The whole word defect, you defected the system. In other words, you cut all the ties. By Soviet law, you were declared a criminal. My mother would lose all her foreign travels. She would be the mother of a defector, and I just couldn't see myself do that. It was a too high a price of that. So I thought about it, entertained the idea, and decided not to do it. The other way was to go with this window of opportunity, official immigration. First, official immigration, which I witnessed. Russia started to let the Jews out. What happened was that they made a contract with the United States, because Russia at that point was not producing enough grain and wheat, which means bread, and they exchanged the Russian Jews for grain and wheat that they were getting from America. It started when I was about 18. All of a sudden, many people who I knew for sure had no Jewish blood in their veins became Jewish. And I remember coming to Riga in the summer, in the Yurmala, and there was always this part of the Russian intelligentsia mainly discussing, should they go, should they not go? And every year you come back, every summer, and I went several years in a row, the people were disappearing. So all of a sudden that window of opportunity opened up. Now, it was not working just like that. You decided to leave, you go. The whole country was always founded on a lie. So the lie was that they are connecting families. The Soviet Jews were allowed to reunite with their families in Israel. Many of them never saw Israel. They just went to Europe or to America or to Australia. But the invitation was coming from Israel. And in my case, I was going to rejoin with my third cousin who never existed. And they knew it very well. It was a game, absolutely a game. But each case was still in the hands of the Soviets. So for me, being already a laureate of international competitions, having my own name recognition as well as my parents, was very risky just to say, oh, I want to go and reunite with my third cousin. No. What they usually do in this situation, they kick you out immediately of the whatever college you are, in this case, Moscow Conservatory, and you go straight into military. And I was assigned when I was 16 years old to Navy and Marines, so to speak. because I was a healthy young man. And 3 years with a desire to leave the country, you can be sure that my hands will never be able to play violin, because they'll make sure that I damage my hands and they'll beat me up. And that was just not. So the big thing was, before doing anything, to get a medical leave of absence for a year. The first step was to convince the musical establishment and whatever, party or KGB were behind it and were observing it, to convince them that I was no longer a valuable asset. And they invested in my education, free education, great teachers, this and that. But that was a bad investment, that I was no longer a prospect of successful life as a performer, as a concert violinist, because I couldn't play the violin. So I had to disappear from all the concerts were canceled. I went absolutely incognito. And the most telling, of course, move was that I was chosen to go to Brussels, and they were hoping I would get the first prize. But then I decided that I'm not going. Brussels competition was one of the first pre-war competition. After the war, the first competition was in 1951, and the Cold War was very much in the air. So my father asked, of all people, he asked his biggest competitor, Kogan. He said, Lyonya, are we, as Soviets, taking part in Brussels? I said, no, absolutely not. I know for sure. No. You can just go on vacation. And so my father went on vacation without taking violin. When he came back, of course, the audition was on. So he missed that chance. And Kogan deservedly got the first prize. No question. He played like a god in those days. But Kogan knew already that just being so talented and so accomplished as a violinist, this little Jew from Dnipropetrovsk, now it's Dnipro, is not going to make it in the Soviet system. So he wrote a big article in Izvestia, a big paper, about the poor life of Belgian homeless. He made up that it's terrible and it's a capitalist, the exploitation of the working class. They were so upset and so offended in Brussels that was the gratitude. Now it's Yehudi Menuhin's story to me. He said, in 1955, the next competition in Brussels, we were so anti-Soviet because of that whole, anyone but the Soviet. And my father got the second prize. That was his last competition. So that was very much in my character to go and prove them all wrong and win that particular competition. Once I established that I cannot go because I'm not well, I went, seemed logical. I wanted to cure myself. So I checked into that hospital. I was not nearly as sick. I was not sick at all. But I had to really pretend that I could not play. I had inflamed muscles. I could not play. In this case, my uncle was incredibly helpful. My uncle is somebody who can go through all the labyrinths and find ways better than anybody. I mean, I've never met anybody so capable of charming and cajoling and finding the way, and everybody liked him, and he got what he wanted for somebody else, usually. He managed to get me my first great violin by moving the owner of the violin from Novosibirsk to Moscow. That was mission impossible. A retired concertmaster of Novosibirsk Opera House would be allowed to move from Novosibirsk. That was the condition to sell the violin. But there was one condition that nobody could do except my uncle. And so he found those doctors in that particular hospital who basically, they were part of this plan. I don't think he bribed anybody, but though I wouldn't rule it out, because if they really wanted to know, they would have found nothing really wrong. And there, of course, I realized that I was just, I was in a very special place. Geez, it was just one step before psychiatric ward, the clinic for nervous disease. Every other night, there would be a siren in the middle of the night, and somebody from our department would be brought there. I had 5 people, including myself, in that room. One turned out to be Всеволод Petrushansky. He was my father's accompanist on my father's last tour, can you imagine? And he was dying of multiple sclerosis. So also, one was absolutely wonderful young boy of 19. I used to push his wheelchair. The third one was 27-year-old. And while I was there, they realized he also had an MS, which totally destroyed him. But the fourth one was most unusual. He was a quiet guy who would just come in, and then you could see how his will to live was leaving him. He didn't seem to be in pain or anything, but they would give him tranquilizers every day, more and more, because he would come in and miss his bed sometimes, just fall on the floor. And that was happening all in my little room. I was there for a month, and as a result of that, I got this special declaration that I needed a rest for at least a year. And with this paper, that was not enough to get that medical leave of absence. I had to go to Moscow conservatory doctor, who, based on this document, gave the recommendation to give me that 1 year of absence, which was the saving, that window of opportunity. Now, she gave it to me probably at about the same time as I would have been in Brussels. Believe it or not, a month later, Yuri Egorov went abroad on tour while he was on his leave of absence. That's how he defected and stayed in the West. As a result, this doctor got fired. So the window of opportunity for me was a few weeks. So I was very lucky. The third very important element was to get your parents, in my case, just my mother, permission to leave. Because case of Vladimir Feldsman, where he had the invitation, he applied to leave, but his famous pop composer father, Oskar Feldsman, being afraid that his songs would be forbidden, said, no, I don't let him leave. And he became a dissident, and he was held there for a good 2 years, if not 3 years. It was a Soviet law. Otherwise, Feldsman would have left without his father's permission. And I had a lot of problems with, my relatives. I didn't talk to them for 6 months. And now I had to start talking to them. So they all thought of me as sometimes dangerous element in the family, as my grandmother would not let me speak to my cousin, the younger one, because she thought I was corrupting him with the anti-Soviet propaganda. She would literally close my mouth when we would be together. So my mother, we already had a difficult relationship, but she also knew that I was so contra-Soviet that there was no way to hold me in unless she wanted to ruin my life and say, no, I don't give you permission. But that would have been too much for her. And then when my mother was giving me a permission, then also the director of conservatory, Kulikov at that point, he asked her, he said, Bella, he wants to leave. Are you leaving as well? She said, no. And she was right. She was honest. Said, well, he's not well. He's hoping maybe to find a cure to his disease somewhere abroad. So that seems legit. In the meantime, I asked 2 sources. One was Vladimir Landsman, my good friend, who immigrated also that way. He was already living in Montreal. And when I saw him the year before in 1975, we agreed that I would write him a little postcard with a coded message. That means that he would ask somebody from Israel to send me an invitation of so-called relative. And then there was another one. So I actually got two of them. So once I got them, I already had that, leave of absence, my mother's permission and all that. And when I went to OVIR, which means a special agency for immigration, to apply, I knew I was immune to be taken to the army. And I went to OVIR and applied. And she said, "Oh, you are 22. Aren't you afraid to get into the army?" I said, "No." I said, "I don't mean Israeli army," she said. I said, "No, I understand. You mean the Soviet army." She said, "Yes." And then she made a phone call right in front of me, yeah? Said, "What about Sitkovetsky, Dmitry, 1954 now?" And then they told her that they could not get me into the army because they wouldn't expel me from Moscow Conservatory. Then she looked at me and said, "You people." I love that phrase, which I've heard several times in my life. You people. So we people were pretty smart. From the time I decided not to go to Brussels, go to the hospital and everything, and by the time I left was a year and a quarter, probably 15 months. And this is an experience which now, of course, I could philosophize and think, oh, well, it made me much stronger or much wiser or whatever, But at that time, it was a very difficult emotionally because I was leaving absolutely everyone. I was setting myself up for a death to that system. And people were coming and saying goodbye to me like to a dead person. And I remember, this whole period when Ksana, my closest friend, was pregnant with her first child. She was getting ready for a birth. And I was going to go through death. So that's very interesting how this dynamic was going parallel. We went on many, many drives, walks. Once I knew the date, which was 23rd of May, 1977. And then I said, "But what's going to happen if I don't even see your child?" She said, No. I have to give birth before 15th of May because you're leaving on the 23rd, but I'll be back a week later. At that time, they had the mother and the baby for a week. And that's exactly what happened. So that was a momentous occasion. It was a lot of emotions, but I was very, very focused. There were no direct flight to Israel, so we were all going through Vienna. And I left with 2 suitcases, a factory violin, and no bow. They wouldn't allow any of my bows. But of course, my uncle already arranged through his good friend that in Vienna, he gave me one of my bows. So I did have a bow, but not from Moscow. And in Vienna, they were immediately people by the plane said, "Are you going to Israel or you want to go somewhere else?" I said, "I want to go to America." This podcast was produced by Libo Studio. My name is Dmitry Sitkovetsky. And in the next episode, New York grabs me by the throat.